Elizabeth of York was the only woman in English history to be at once the daughter, sister, niece, wife, and mother of kings. The series The White Princess paints a vivid picture of Elizabeth of York's life. But how much of it is based on fact and how much is pure fiction? Let's find out together in this video. Let's open strong, with forbidden love and royal bed sheets. The series wastes no time and gives us this. Elizabeth of York reminiscing about a passionate night with her uncle, Richard III. According to the show, had Richard survived, she would have become his queen. Let's unpack this madness. Rumours that Richard had intentions to marry his niece did circulate during his reign, but they only emerged after the death of his wife, Anne Neville. On March 30th, 1485, Richard felt compelled to publicly deny these claims in front of prominent London figures. At the time, negotiations were already underway for him to marry a Portuguese princess, making it clear that marriage to Elizabeth was not part of his plan. If Richard had chosen to marry his niece, it would have been a political disaster. He would have had to publicly recognise Elizabeth as legitimate, which would also legitimise her brothers, the so-called princes in the Tower. That, in turn, would have completely undermined the very claim Richard used to take the crown. But okay, maybe marriage wasn't possible. But what about feelings? We know almost nothing for certain about Elizabeth's feelings toward Richard, aside from two accounts, one contemporary, the other not. She's owned a book that Richard had given her, with a personal dedication and signature inside. Elizabeth later wrote her name and a dedication of her own, suggesting she appreciated the gift. The second piece of evidence is the infamous Croydon letter, supposedly written by Elizabeth to the Duke of Norfolk, pleading for his support in marrying Richard, calling him her only joy and maker in the world. This letter was allegedly discovered over a century later, and while a few people claimed to have read it, the letter itself has mysteriously vanished. So, in short, there's no solid historical evidence of a romantic or physical relationship between uncle and niece. But, of course, that's no problem for the series. In the series, Henry and Elizabeth sleep together before marriage, and, in fact, Henry is shown assaulting Elizabeth to test her fertility. But where did this disturbing storyline come from? And why did Philippa Gregory decide to include it in her version of events? The root of this idea seems to be the birth of their first child, Prince Arthur, who was born just 8 months after their wedding. The marriage took place on January 18th, 1486, and Arthur was born on September 20th. Now, what really happened? We can't say for certain. It could have simply been a premature birth. Or, as some sources suggest, perhaps the couple considered themselves married even before the official ceremony. At that time, a formal betrothal was often taken almost as seriously as a marriage. And since the process of overturning Elizabeth's illegitimacy and obtaining papal dispensation was taking time, the couple may have already considered themselves husband and wife, and were likely in love. And what do you think? Was there really a relationship between them before the wedding? Or was baby Arthur simply born early? There's something deeply unsettling about the way Philippa Gregory consistently includes scenes of aggressive sex, especially in royal relationships. It was disturbing in The Other Bolingo, and it's disturbing here again. This isn't historical accuracy. It's someone pushing a fantasy into public view, and honestly, it feels inappropriate. By the way, the series portrays the beginning of their marriage as a kind of power struggle. Elizabeth constantly opposing her husband. There are different opinions about the nature of their early relationship. According to historian Polydore Virgil, who spent time at the Tudor court, Elizabeth was an unhappy creature at being united with a man who is the enemy of her family. However, modern historian Alison Weir suggests the couple were actually quite fond of each other even before marriage. She bases this view on the wording of the oath given by Stanley, Earl of Derby, in the dispensation petition. He stated that the aforesaid lady, Elizabeth, has not been captured nor compelled, but of great and intimate love and cordial affection, desires to contract marriage with the said king, to the knowledge of this sworn, as he says in virtue of his oath. As we history lovers know, the mystery of the princes in the Tower remains one of the greatest unsolved puzzles in history. In the series, Edward V is murdered in the Tower on Margaret Beaufort's orders, while his younger brother, Richard of York, is secretly saved by Elizabeth Woodville, who manages to have him smuggled out of the country. Later, he reappears in the series, claiming his right to the throne. This figure, Perkin Warbeck, supposedly Richard of York, is actually a real historical person. But the series plays a bit loosely with the facts of his biography. Historically, Henry VII treated Perkin at court as a nobleman, but he certainly did not sleep with Perkin's wife, as shown in the show. In fact, we have no evidence whatsoever of Henry VII being unfaithful to Elizabeth, or of him having any illegitimate children. It seems he was a loyal husband and, by all accounts, loved Elizabeth deeply throughout his life. Also, Perkin Warbeck and his wife, Catherine Gordon, had no children, contrary to what the series suggests, and it's unlikely that Elizabeth ever formally met Perkin. I'm not entirely sure how that would have worked, given that they were technically living at the same court for a time, but there's no record of a direct confrontation or her expressing any official opinion about him. My guess is that yes, she saw him and likely had thoughts about him, but Henry seems to have kept her at a distance from the whole situation. As for the executions, the Earl of Warwick, portrayed in the series as Teddy, and Perkin Warbeck were not executed together. In fact, there were 6 days between their deaths. Warwick was beheaded on Tower Hill, while the commoner, Perkin Warbeck, was hanged at Tyburn. Still, Warbeck is a fascinating figure. He truly posed a threat to Henry's rule, gained significant support, and apparently resembled Edward IV. So what do you think? Was he really the lost Duke of York, or just a very convincing imposter? Now, let's talk about the marriage negotiations between Prince Arthur and Catherine of Aragon. First of all, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York did not travel to the Spanish court for this purpose. That simply didn't happen. In the spring of 1489, English ambassadors were sent to negotiate with Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. The very idea of monarchs standing like schoolchildren in front of another royal couple is, frankly, a bit absurd. Did the Perkin Warbeck situation affect the marriage negotiations? In the series, Isabella quite openly tells Henry and Elizabeth to resolve the issue before Catherine can be offered as a bride. In reality, the marriage agreement did face delays and complications, and yes, instability in England was part of the reason. Shortly after Warbeck's army was defeated in 1497, Henry personally wrote to the Spanish ambassador de Puebla to share the good news. The letter was addressed, "To our most beloved de Puebla." From that moment on, Catherine's future as the Princess of Wales began to take real shape. Interestingly, Isabella of Castile and Elizabeth of York corresponded directly. Elizabeth began the exchange in December 1497 with a friendly get-to-know-you letter to Queen Isabella. She asked her to write back very often, not only about herself, but also about young Catherine. In return, Elizabeth promised to keep Isabella well informed about her beloved Arthur. The letter was written in Latin. A fun historical detail: Catherine of Aragon was, through her mother, descended from the House of Lancaster, which made her a third cousin of her future father-in-law, Henry VII, and a fourth cousin of her future mother-in-law, Elizabeth of York. Honestly, there's so much more that could be said, like the awful costumes, where Elizabeth's cleavage seemed to have its own storyline, or the cringeworthy name shortenings like Lizzie, which were definitely not used in England at the time. But I'd rather focus on Elizabeth's character overall. In the series, she's portrayed as deeply contradictory, and by the end, she turns into a fortune schemer. She sits in on her husband's council meetings, gives political advice, but the real Elizabeth was nothing like that. First of all, she stayed away from politics entirely, and second, she was known for her gentle and refined nature. Everyone agreed that Elizabeth was a true lady, the most distinguished and the most noble lady in the whole of England, as the Spanish ambassador, coming from a culture that held noble women to very high standards, once described her. She was beautiful, gracious, intelligent, and most importantly, a unifying and healing presence in a royal family often dominated by strong-willed, even aggressive personalities. Her character had a profound impact on her son, Henry VIII, who saw her as the perfect queen, and spent the rest of his life searching for those same qualities in his wives, not the cold, scandal-driven woman we see at the end of The White Princess. What do you think of the series? Personally, I think it's not a bad way to get curious about the Wars of the Roses, but like with any historical drama, you have to fact-check everything. and definitely take Philippa Gregory with a grain of salt. I'm really looking forward to reading your comments, and see you in the next video.